Following on from Martin's video, where he went through his favourite cars that he'd actually want to own should money be no object, well, here's my list. And some of them were actually covered quite well by Martin. As you can see, the dog is back. Go on, Oakley. And joining me for the video. So, let's get started. First thing I'm going to do is get the two cars that I'd love to own again out of the way, and if money was no object, I would actually go for them again. These are the Rover SD1 Series 2, although I'd probably get a 3.5 litre V8 this time, because I've had the 2 litre O Series engine with the 4-cylinder. I've had a 2.6 straight 6, and it'd be really nice to actually have the V8 as well, just to experience driving one and having that comfort, especially on the motorways. The one thing I loved about the SD1, yes, it was a fuel guzzler around town. You stick it in on the motorway, you put it in 5th gear, it went forever. You could literally do, I think I did about my 2.6, I did a week in Blackpool, so we drove all the way to Blackpool, did the whole week there, drove back, and still had about a quarter of a tank left, so we'd done about a good couple of 100 miles in that week. And the only time we actually used the most fuel was pottering around Blackpool, or pottering from Lytham St Anne's to Blackpool and back. What else? I'd have the Audi Coupe again. Absolutely loved that car, the Quattro Coupe. The original one, the sort of squarish one that was in the early 1980s and featured in Life on Mars. Oh, yeah, it was Life on Mars. Absolutely loved that car. 2.2 litre 5-cylinder, and it was brilliant fun. Loved it. I'd definitely have one of those again if money was no object. But what else? Well, one of the cars I've always liked, and it's probably the only time it's actually going to appear in this list, is the Lamborghini Countach. And the reason I like that is it was effectively the start of what you class as the current Lamborghini line. It was the original car to bring that shape in. And while the anniversary edition sort of mellowed the lines a little bit and sort of hinted at where the Diablo was going to be heading when that came out, it's the original boxy car that I really prefer. Everything is a straight line. The windscreen is perfectly flat. They obviously hadn't heard of curves. Sort of the equivalent of the sporty Volvo of the day, but a bit more styling. So yeah, but would I want an original? Probably not. I'd probably go for the kit car. 1 is cheaper to actually get, 2 is cheaper to maintain, and 3 is easier to get the parts for. So I'd probably get the Lamborghini Countach kit car, a complete kit car that's being built, because they were an absolute pain to build. And many people sort of got part way through, it got too complicated for them and they'd sell them off before they'd finished them. So it'd have to be a completed one, and it'd have to be in pretty good condition as well. One that Martin touched on that I like as well is the Mark II MR2, the curvy one from the early 90s. That was a car I liked, but I'd also like the original MR2 as well. And I'd actually prefer the original to the more curvy one. Not because I like the car, but because it's quite easy to adapt. And there were quite a few kits made for it. kit car builders will know these, which you could turn it into something else, basically taking the body panels off, replacing them with the kit car body panels. So it's a nice simple kit to actually start on and get going with. But yeah, it was a nice car to actually have and own. The curvy one I'd like to actually have as a sort of cheap sports car, really. Although they're not that cheap these days, they're actually appreciating in value quite a lot. So, one to watch for. Another one, probably a bit of an unusual choice, this one. I'd like the Porsche 911, but one specific Porsche 911, and that's the 996, the one that everybody technically hates. And I'd have that because that is the one everybody technically hates. There is a bit of sort of a build-up around that now. Porsche have officially declared it a classic. It's taken a while to do that, but they've officially declared it a classic now. And it was the first Porsche to actually break the mould, as it were, because every single Porsche up to then, including the 993, was effectively based on the same car, the same 911, that was originally released in the 60s. So you were effectively buying an evolution of that car, which wasn't too different from it. It got rid of the chassis, it got rid of the whole suspension system and replaced it all. It replaced the styling at the front. Everything about that car was new, which you could not say about any 911 beforehand. They were all an evolution of what went before, and this was a completely new car. The only thing carried over was the gear linkage from the 993 and the rear suspension from the 993, and even that was changed. So it's the first true breakaway car, and arguably, had that car not been released and it just developed on the 993, the 911 wouldn't be around today. And you could actually argue as well, Porsche might not have been around today. Yes, they just released the Boxster, and one of the big complaints was that the new 911 looks too much like the Boxster at the front. But the irony is the Boxster was designed, or started the design process, after the new 911. And they didn't know how they were going to finish the car off. They weren't sure what they were going to do for the styling. So they went to the 911 team, who had got all this styling done, and thought, yeah, that looks really good for the front of our car. And that's what they then went with. And the Boxster came out first. So even though the 911 had that design first, it was the Boxster that came out first. And of course, the 911 people, who were already against the car anyway, were basically saying, oh, you've just made it look like the cheaper car. The irony being, the cheaper car was made to look like the more expensive one. Next car, what would I have? Money, no objects. I do like Maserati. And there was one, I can't remember the actual name of it, at the Supercar Saturday back in 2017. And that was an absolutely stunning car. There was one or two others out there as well, and I think the older Maseratis are quite nice to actually look at. They're quite nice to drive, they've got a nice style to them, and yes, they can be a pain in the backside to maintain, but I do seriously think that certainly the more older Maseratis are really, really special. And one of those, not particularly bothered about which one, but yeah, I quite like those. Martin touched on Aston Martin, looking at the DB9 and the DB5. And we did sort of feature as well the Vantage in there, and the Vantage is the one I actually like to have. Money no object, quite like the Vantage, nice little two-seater sports car, and it has that look. It has that Aston Martin look, which is quite distinctive, and I love the actual layout of the car as well. I mean, I was sat in the thing. I'd never really thought about Aston Martin before then. It was a brand that was in with James Bond, with the DB5, and loved the DB5, but it's not a kind of car I'd like to own. The Vantage is. Nice little engine, quite a nice meaty little sound to it. That's the kind of car I'd actually like. It's nice, smallish, not too loud and leery, but loud and leery enough. One of the cars I first had when I first started driving was a Mark I Ford Fiesta. And the thing I remember is I always liked the styling of the Mark II XR2. And that is a car I'd actually like to have. Again, money no objects, because they're getting to be a bit of a rarity these days, and they are expensive to find. You know, if you find them, they've got a high price to them. But it is a car that I actually like, and it still has that sort of quality to it. Yeah, yes, it was basically a Mark II Fiesta with some plastic bits bolted on and a bit of a boost to the engine, suspension tweaks as well. But it was one of those raw cars of the day. You didn't have any help with things like steering and stuff like that, because power steering wasn't in those cars. Don't particularly like the Mark III XR2. I do like the Mark I. The Mark I actually. I didn't see many of them around, but the Mark II Fiesta XR2 is definitely one I'd like to sort of get the opportunity to have. What else? Oakley, any particular cars that you like? Yes, I know you like sitting in the back of mine and Grandad Ian's and everybody else's. But you'd like an estate, wouldn't you? You can have room in the back of an estate and shut you in the back as well. Not that it stops your farts from coming through. The one I would really, really like to have is the BMW i8. Absolutely love that car. I wouldn't necessarily want the convertible. The convertible's great. It really is. It gets all that, with the roof where the back seats would be in the actual the i8 regular. But I'd rather have the original i8. And I remember seeing it 2014, driving home from work then, and the BMW dealership was still being built in Leeds. The big BMW dealership that's there now was being built, and it was there on the side, and it looked fantastic in black. And that was it. I absolutely loved the car. It's probably the first BMW I've actually lusted after, in a way, since the M1. And we got the opportunity to film one, so I thought, would we be able to test drive one? And yes, while BMW in our area were quite happy for us to test drive it, when they checked with BMW Central, who basically control all the dealerships and all the franchises, it was a straight no. We couldn't film it. So they were still gracious enough to let us test drive it. We went, I went out in it, drove it around. I think we did about 15 so miles in it, which doesn't sound much, but it's a pretty good indicator of how good a car is. And loved it. Absolutely loved it. Yeah, okay, there's not much boot space in the back, but if you're using it to disappear for a weekend or something like that, you don't need a massive amount of boot space. Myself and my wife went camping with all the stuff in an MGTF, and that's technically got less boot space. So an i8 is practically enough. I did a week's shopping with the TF, and it fitted in the boot, so it'll fit in the i8's boot, no problem. And that is the ultimate car. I mean, we've got the review up there. It was the first car review we actually did, we published. So if you go onto the website, it's dead easy to find. It's the one at the bottom. And if you go onto our cars playlist, again, it's the one at the bottom. So it's there. You find out what I actually thought of it there and then. And the thought hasn't changed over time. The convertible is beautiful. And if you want a convertible in that sort of style, you can't go wrong. But I do prefer the original i8. That's the car that really does it for me. What colour would I have it in? I do like the metallic red. And I really do like that matte black. I don't particularly like it in photos. You see it in photos, it doesn't look particularly good. But when you're there, next to it, it looks amazing. But then again, a regular black one would as well. Because when you actually, if you were buying an i8 brand new and you wanted either of those colours, it's a £6,000 option. But then again, when you're paying £100,000 for a car, £6,000 neither here nor there. Yes, I would absolutely love an i8. I would, if the opportunity came up, I'd have one straight away. But that depends on the right one and the right colour being available at some point if I ever have the money. But yeah, that is my ultimate car. That's the one I would absolutely have, no questions asked. If I could not have any other car, that would be the one. If it's just one out of that entire list, that would be the one. And on that note, it's time for me to finish. So, keep safe, keep watching, and we'll get through this together. Bye for now.